Ethan had always been the kind of cowboy who liked quiet places. People in the small mountain town knew him as the man who spoke softly, worked hard, and kept his thoughts to himself. He lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of the valley, far from the loud saloons and busy roads. Most people thought he preferred it that way, and for the most part, they were right. But sometimes, even he felt the weight of silence. Sometimes, he wished someone understood him without him needing to explain. That day, he rode into town because the local community was having a wedding gathering. It wasn't a wedding exactly. It was a cultural welcome for a new bride who had just moved into the region. The town wanted to greet her with old customs, food, and music. Ethan didn't know her, but he respected tradition. So he came. He expected a simple night, some greetings, a few polite conversations, and then a quiet ride back home before sundown. But nothing went the way he expected. When he entered the gathering place, a wide-open barn lit with hanging lanterns, his eyes landed on someone who stood out immediately. She wasn't like the other women in town. She was taller by a head, wider in the shoulders, and carried herself with the calm strength of someone who had lived a life full of challenges but never bowed under them. Her name was Mira, and everyone whispered about her the moment she stepped into the room. Some called her the giant bride, though not in a cruel way. It was just the truth. She was larger built, strong, and her presence made everyone look twice. But she wasn't scary. In fact, there was something peaceful in her face, something gentle in the way she watched people. She wore a traditional mountain wedding robe, a huge multi-layered garment made from thick woven fabric. It reached her ankles, wrapped around her many times, and was tied with complicated knots. The robe looked heavy enough to challenge even a strong man. Ethan didn't plan to speak to her. He didn't even plan to stand close. But fate rarely cared about anyone's plans. While Ethan stood in the corner, sipping warm tea and watching people dance, he noticed Mira glancing his way. Not in a romantic way, not even in a curious way, just noticing him, as if she saw something quiet inside him and wanted to know more. A few elders approached Mira, laughing and teasing her gently about how difficult her ceremonial robe was to remove. It was a famous thing in her culture, that only someone patient and gentle could undo the knots properly. They joked that her future husband would need hours of practice. Mira laughed with them, her voice deep but warm. Then one of the older women pointed at Ethan and said, "Look there, the quiet cowboy. He has steady hands. Maybe he can untie those knots faster than any of us." Ethan almost choked on his tea. He didn't want attention. He didn't want everyone staring at him. But Mira looked at him again, this time with a spark in her eyes. She walked toward him slowly, her steps strong but elegant. The room grew quieter as she approached. Ethan tried to look away, but she stopped right in front of him. "You're Ethan, right?" she asked, her voice surprisingly soft. He nodded. He didn't trust his voice yet. She smiled a little, not mocking, just amused. "They say you're a man with calm hands." Ethan shook his head quickly. "I don't know about calm. I just work with horses and ropes." "Good," she said. "Because these knots are harder than ropes." Before he could understand her meaning, she stepped back a little and lifted her arms slightly, showing the robe. Her expression turned playful, but not rude or improper. It was more like someone testing a friend's courage. "Take off my clothes if you can," she said. The room went silent for a moment, then filled with laughter. Ethan felt his ears burn. Mira didn't mean anything improper. Everyone knew she was talking about the ceremonial robe, the many layers tied with endless knots. It was a respected tradition in her culture, not something embarrassing. But for a moment, Ethan felt the world tilt. A woman like her, strong and confident, challenging a quiet man like him. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. But he didn't want to disrespect her tradition. "If it's part of the custom," Ethan said carefully, "I can try." People cheered lightly, amused. Mira looked pleased, not because she wanted to tease him, but because she seemed genuinely curious to see how he would respond. She guided him to stand in front of her, while the elders gathered around at a respectful distance. Ethan reached for the first knot. His fingers brushed the thick fabric, and he immediately felt the heaviness of it. He touched the knot, trying to figure out where it began and ended. But the moment he touched it, his hand trembled slightly. He didn't know why. The knot wasn't frightening. The robe wasn't magical. But her presence, strong, towering, calm, made him feel something he couldn't describe. He took a slow breath, tried again, and the knot loosened a little. Mira watched him quietly. She didn't laugh. She didn't joke. She didn't pressure him. And somehow, her silence made him even more nervous. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "I'm fine," he whispered, though his heart was beating faster than it should. "It's just a knot," she added gently. "Not a test of strength." But Ethan felt like it was something more. Not a test of strength, but a test of something else. Maybe patience. Maybe trust. Maybe something inside him that he didn't know how to explain. He loosened the first knot after a minute of careful work. People clapped softly, impressed. Mira nodded as if she expected him to succeed. "Good," she said. "Now the second." The second knot was tighter. Ethan leaned closer, trying to understand its pattern. The robe smelled faintly of mountain herbs, something soothing and earthy. Standing so close, he could feel the calm warmth radiating from Mira. She was strong, yes, but she wasn't intimidating. She was simply herself, steady, grounded, present. His fingers worked slowly, tracing every twist and turn. His breath grew uneven. His heart kept thumping for reasons he didn't understand. He had helped many horses, fixed many saddles, tied many ropes. But he had never felt this kind of nervousness. He felt eyes on him from all sides, but Mira's eyes were the ones that made him tremble. Not because she was judging him, but because she was watching him with a quiet trust that was unfamiliar. Finally, the second knot loosened. Warm applause rose again. Ethan stepped back slightly, wiping sweat from his brow even though the barn was cool. Mira tilted her head. "It's the knots," he said quickly, though he knew that wasn't the reason. "They're not that hard," she said gently. He swallowed. "I know." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes deep and calm, and he felt like she could see something inside him. He didn't want to admit, not fear, not embarrassment, but a strange mix of respect, nervousness, and connection. "Do you want to stop?" she asked. "It's all right if you do." Ethan shook his head. "I started it. I should finish. Enter. Enter." She smiled softly. "Then I trust you with the next one." Her words made his heart jump again. He didn't know why trust from a stranger could shake him so deeply. Maybe because it had been a long time since anyone trusted him with anything personal. Maybe because her confidence in him felt heavier than the robe itself. The third knot was the hardest yet. His fingers slipped once, and she steadied his hand lightly, not holding it, just giving support. Even that small touch sent a rush through him. Not romantic, not improper, just human, kind, warm. When he finally loosened it, he let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Mira nodded again. She looked proud of him, though she never said it aloud. 3 knots down, many more to go. Ethan stood there, his hands still trembling slightly, his breath uneven, and he realized something that made his heart shake even more than before. He wasn't trembling because of the robe. He was trembling because of her. And this was only the beginning. Ethan stood there with his hands slightly shaking, staring at the next set of knots on Mira's robe. He took a slow breath, trying to steady himself, but it didn't help much. The room wasn't loud. but he could feel every pair of eyes waiting to see what the quiet cowboy would do next. Some people were amused, some surprised, and some simply curious. But one person wasn't judging him at all, Mira. She watched him with calm patience, like she believed he could do it even if he didn't believe it himself. "You're doing well," she said softly. Her voice made him lift his eyes for a moment. She wasn't teasing him. She meant it. That alone made his heart beat faster. "I'm trying," he said quietly. She gave a small nod. That's enough. He didn't know why those simple words hit him so deeply. Maybe because he wasn't used to being told he was enough. In his life, everything had always been about doing more. More work, more hours, more responsibility. No one ever told him that trying was good. No one ever told him that doing his best was enough. He leaned forward again, fingers searching for the beginning of the fourth knot. This one was smaller but tucked inside a fold of fabric that made it hard to see. The robe was beautifully made, full of details and careful stitching. It felt old, traditional, important. He didn't want to damage it. He didn't want to disrespect the culture. Mira sensed his hesitation. "Take your time," she said. Ethan nodded. For a moment, the world shrank to just the knot and her steady breathing. He could hear her exhale slowly, the sound soft but grounding. It helped him focus. He carefully slid his fingers under the fabric, lifting it gently. His movements were slow, deliberate, respectful. The knot loosened, millimeter by millimeter. While he worked, Mira spoke quietly, so only he could hear. "You have hands made for careful work." He almost froze at her words. I just work with horses," he murmured. "Yes," she said. "That is careful work. Horses trust you because you treat them gently." No one had ever talked to him like that. People in town called him quiet, shy, or unimportant. But Mira spoke about him like he had value. It made something warm grow in his chest. He swallowed and kept working on the knot. "You know," she continued in a small smile, "most men try to pull these knots open with force. They think strength is the answer to everything." Ethan shook his head. "Strength breaks things." Her eyes softened. "Exactly." He finally loosened the fourth knot. It slipped free smoothly. A few people clapped softly, but he barely heard them. He only noticed Mira's expression. She looked calm, almost proud. "Another one done," she said gently. "Yeah," he whispered, feeling his cheeks warm. He moved to the next knot. This one was tied near her waist. As he reached for it, he realized how close he was standing. Close enough to feel the warmth of her body through the robe. Close enough to smell the faint scent of mountain herbs from the fabric. Close enough to hear her quiet breathing over the murmurs of the crowd. He tried to focus on the knot, but his hands shook again. Mira noticed immediately. "Do I make you nervous?" she asked softly. He froze. He didn't know how to answer. He didn't want to disrespect her, but he didn't want to lie either. He swallowed. "You're not like anyone I've met." She blinked. "Is that good? Or bad?" He took a long breath. "Good. Just unexpected." She laughed very softly, a warm, low sound. Unexpected can be nice sometimes. Her words did nothing to calm his heart. If anything, his hands shook more. But he forced himself to keep working. The fifth knot was thick and tangled, and he needed both hands to loosen it. Mira didn't move, trusting him completely. "You know," she said in a thoughtful voice, "you didn't have to accept the challenge." Ethan nodded. "I know. Many men said no. I didn't want to disrespect the custom." "Respect," she repeated softly. Ethan looked up at her for a moment. Their eyes met. There was something warm in her gaze, not romantic, not heavy, just a gentle understanding. It made him feel seen in a way he had never felt before. The fifth knot loosened. Mira let out a small breath, as if impressed. "You are patient," she said. He shook his head. "I'm mostly just scared of doing it wrong." "You're not," she said firmly. "You're doing it right." Those words made him feel something he didn't have a name for. Something heavy, but comforting. He moved on to the next knot. At this point, he could feel the robe becoming slightly looser. It wasn't falling off or anything. There were still many layers. But he could see how the knots were more than just knots, they were symbols. Each one represented something about trust, patience, respect. Mira's culture didn't let just anyone touch the robe. She chose who was allowed to untie it, and she had chosen him. But why? He didn't have the courage to ask. Not yet. The sixth knot was tight and hidden under a decorative loop. He worked at it slowly, carefully. Mira stood still, breathing calmly, as if encouraging him without words. "You're very gentle," she murmured, "gentler than people expect." Ethan's heart jumped. "How would you know what people expect?" "I watch people," she said simply. "I see how they act." "And what do you see in me?" he asked, before he could stop himself. She paused, thinking. Then, she said the words that made him freeze completely. "I see someone who carries a lot inside but speaks very little." His breath caught. That was truer than he wanted to admit. "You're quiet outside," she continued softly. "But inside?" Ethan didn't know what to say. No one had ever understood him so quickly. No one had looked at him and seen something real. He finally opened the sixth knot. The robe loosened a little more. People whispered around them, impressed at how steady he was becoming, how focused. Mira didn't care about the crowd. She cared about him. "Most men would make a joke," she said. "Or rush. Or brag. But you're different." "Different how?" Ethan asked quietly. "You respect the moment," she said. "And you respect me." He looked at her hands, resting by her sides. Strong hands. Calm hands. A woman who could lift things. Most men couldn't. Yet here she stood, trusting a quiet cowboy to undo her ceremonial robe knot by knot. Ethan worked on the seventh knot, and this time his hands didn't shake as much. Maybe he was getting used to her presence. Maybe her words had steadied him more than he realized. Maybe the quiet connection forming between them was becoming stronger. As he pulled the seventh knot open, Mira shifted slightly, letting the robe adjust its weight. Ethan stepped back carefully. "You're doing better than I expected," she said with a thoughtful smile. He laughed softly, nervous. "I'm surprising myself too." Her smile widened gently. "Good. Sometimes we learn things about ourselves in unexpected moments." Ethan didn't know what she meant exactly, but he felt the truth inside her words. He had come to the gathering, expecting a simple night. Instead, he was here, untying ceremonial knots on a tall, strong woman who looked at him as if he mattered. It made him wonder what else about tonight would surprise him. He reached for the eighth knot, breathing slower now. His hands felt steadier, though his heart kept beating fast. Mira watched him, not with pressure, but with quiet confidence. And for the first time since the challenge began, Ethan realized something. He didn't want this moment to end too quickly. Not because of the knots, not because of the ritual, but because of her. The giant bride, with gentle eyes, calm strength, and unexpected warmth. The woman who made his hands shake. He loosened the eighth knot and looked up at her. She smiled softly, as if she already knew what he was feeling even before he did. Ethan stood quietly after loosening the eighth knot, trying to steady his breath. The robe had grown lighter around Mira's shoulders, and he could see more of the finely woven patterns beneath the outer layers. Each knot he loosened felt like a small bridge between their worlds. The crowd around them had grown calmer, almost respectful, as if they sensed something meaningful happening between the quiet cowboy and the tall bride. But Ethan wasn't thinking about the crowd. His focus stayed on Mira. and on the strange feeling that had been growing inside him since he started this unexpected task. Mira watched him with a soft expression, her eyes calm, her posture steady. She didn't look embarrassed or nervous. She looked peaceful, almost as if this moment was important to her, for reasons he didn't yet understand. Her steady gaze made Ethan feel warm and unsettled all at once. "You look like you're thinking too much," she said gently. He gave a small, breathless laugh. "Maybe I am. What are you thinking about?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. He stared at the next knot, unsure how honest he wanted to be. But lying to her felt impossible. She had a way of seeing through him. "I'm thinking." He paused. Mira's eyes softened. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let the moment stretch between them, giving it weight. "Because you didn't look at me the way others did," she finally said. Ethan blinked. "How do others look at you?" "Some see me as too big," she said calmly. "Some see me as too strong. Some feel uncomfortable because I don't fit their idea of how a woman should look." She breathed softly. "But you didn't look at me with fear or judgment. You looked at me like a person." Ethan looked down, flustered. "That's just basic respect." "It is," she agreed, "but not everyone gives it." Her words washed over him like warm water. He didn't know what to say, so he simply nodded and reached for the 9th knot. This knot was hidden under a thick fold near her hip, and he had to bend slightly to see it clearly. His hands moved slowly, carefully, brushing against the heavy fabric. Mira stayed still, letting him work. The knot was complicated, woven in a way that made him think someone had intentionally made it harder to loosen. "You know," Mira said softly, "when I came here, I didn't expect anyone to understand me. New places make people nervous, even when they don't show it." Ethan nodded. "I understand that." "You do?" she asked curiously. He hesitated, then said, "I don't fit in most places either." She smiled slightly. "Not fitting in is not always a bad thing. Doesn't always feel that way," he admitted. "You fit here," she said quietly. The words hit him harder than he expected. He swallowed, trying to focus on the knot again. The fabric pressed warm against his fingers. Mira didn't move or rush him. She simply stood in calm silence, giving him space, giving him trust. After a few minutes, the knot loosened. It slipped open gently, causing another layer of the robe to fall slightly. Mira exhaled softly, and Ethan stepped back, feeling both relieved and nervous about how close they stood. "You're doing better than most trained helpers," she said with a soft laugh. "I'm just trying not to mess up," he said. "You haven't," she replied. "Not once." He wasn't sure if she meant the knots or something deeper, but her voice carried warmth, and he felt a slow sense of comfort growing inside. He moved to the 10th knot, which rested near her shoulder. She had to lean slightly for him to reach it comfortably, and the closeness made his heart beat faster. He could feel the warmth rising in his face, and he hoped no one in the crowd could see how red his cheeks were getting. Mira noticed his hands trembling again. "You're shaking," she whispered. He nodded weakly. "I know." "Why?" she asked gently. He didn't look up. "I'm not sure." "Ethan," she said, speaking his name with surprising tenderness. "You don't need to be afraid." "Axon." "I'm not afraid," he said quickly, though he wasn't sure that was true. She waited. Not pushing him. Not rushing him. Just waiting. And something in her patience loosened something inside him. Just like one of the knots. "I'm just not used to being close to someone," he admitted quietly. Mira's expression softened even more. "Neither am I." He looked up, surprised. She continued. "People think I'm strong, but they forget I'm human too. I want connection, just like anyone else. But most people see my size before they see me." Ethan swallowed hard. It made sense. He had seen the stares, The whispers. Not mean, but curious. People couldn't help but stare at someone so tall and strong. But Ethan hadn't stared like that. He had noticed her, but she didn't feel like a novelty to him. She felt like a person with depth and heart. He worked on the 10th knot, his fingers brushing lightly against the fabric. The knot eventually loosened, and Mira smiled softly. "Thank you," she said. "For the knot?" he asked. "For treating me with care," she replied. Ethan didn't know how to respond. He simply nodded and reached for the 11th knot. This knot was small but tight, tied at the front. "You know," she said slowly, "these knots are not only a tradition, they tell a story." "A story?" he asked. She nodded. "In my culture, each knot represents a part of the person's life. The way someone unties them shows how they treat the person wearing the robe." Ethan froze. "What does how I'm untying them say?" Mira gave him a gentle smile. "It says you see me as someone worth being careful with." Her words made his hands shake again. He looked down quickly, embarrassed. Mira didn't laugh. She didn't tease. She simply waited while he composed himself. "You're gentle, patient, and respectful," she said. "Those are rare qualities." "No," he whispered. "They're not rare. I'm just simple." Mira shook her head softly. "Simple is beautiful when it comes from the heart." He loosened the 11th knot. Another layer shifted, revealing a faint, embroidered pattern underneath. The robe looked less heavy now, more relaxed around her. But there were still knots left. Ethan stepped back for a moment, wiping his hands on his trousers. "How many are there?" he asked, with a breathless laugh. Mira chuckled softly. 24. His eyes widened. 24? "That's why it's a tradition," she said. "It is not meant to be easy." He sighed dramatically, and she laughed again. The crowd smiled quietly, seeing a lighter side of the nerves between them. Ethan reached for the 12th knot. This one wasn't as tight, but his hands were growing tired. As he worked, Mira watched him with a thoughtful expression. "Can I tell you something?" she asked. "Of course," he said. "When I saw you standing alone earlier, something about you made me feel calm." He looked up sharply. "Me? Calm?" She nodded. "Yes, you have quiet strength." He felt his throat tighten. "I don't know about that, but I do," she said firmly. The knot loosened. Ethan stepped back again, his heart full, confused, overwhelmed. A silence passed between them, peaceful and warm. Finally he spoke. "Mira, why did you really choose me? You could have asked anyone." Mira looked right into his eyes. Her voice was gentle, but her words carried weight. "Because you didn't look past me. You looked at me." Ethan felt something inside him shift like a door opening. "Ethan," she continued softly, "every knot you untie shows me something about who you are." "What do you see?" he whispered. She smiled. Slow and warm. "I see someone I want to know more." His breath caught. She took a small step closer, not intimidating, just sincere. "And that," she whispered, "matters more than any tradition." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The robe may have been heavy, but the moment felt light, warm, alive. And as he reached for the next knot, he realized something. This wasn't just a ceremony. It was the beginning of something he never expected. Something gentle. Something deep. Something real. Ethan stood still for a moment, letting Mira's words echo inside him. The barn was filled with people, yet everything around him felt soft and distant. Like the world had shifted its focus and left only the two of them in clear view. He didn't know how a simple tradition had turned into something so personal, so meaningful. He didn't know how her eyes could make him feel both exposed and understood at the same time. And he didn't know how to handle the quiet warmth rising in his chest, growing stronger with each knot he loosened. But he knew one thing: he wanted to finish this. Not because people were watching, not because it was a ritual, but because Mira trusted him. And that trust meant more to him than he could explain. He reached for the next knot, the 13th one. It was positioned near her side, half hidden beneath a fold that had loosened as the other knots came undone. As he worked, Mira breathed slowly, as if giving him her calmness through the air. His fingers moved more confidently now, though they occasionally trembled when he caught her watching him with that same quiet, thoughtful gaze. "You're becoming faster," she murmured with a light smile. "Maybe I'm getting used to the knots," he said. "Or maybe," she said softly, "you're getting used to me." His hands paused for a second. The knot slipped loose with a gentle tug. He looked up at her, unsure how to respond to the truth. In her words, she didn't push him. She didn't demand anything. She simply stood with patience. Patience he didn't know he needed until he felt it. The 14th knot was easier. As he loosened it, he saw the robe shift even more. Every layer he removed revealed more delicate work underneath, as if her culture had built stories into the fabric. Ethan wondered if this tradition wasn't just about knots, but also about revealing pieces of someone's life, slowly, respectfully, with care. Mira spoke again, but her voice was quieter, almost shy. "You know, Ethan, I was nervous coming here." He glanced up, surprised. "You?" She nodded. "Being new is hard. People stare, they whisper, they judge before they listen." He frowned softly. "People shouldn't do that." "It happens," she said simply. "I can handle it. But I didn't expect anyone to make me feel welcome." Ethan's eyes softened. "I'm glad you don't feel alone now." She smiled, a small but genuine expression. "You're the reason I don't." His heart jumped again at her words. He swallowed hard and reached for the 15th knot, one that rested near her wrist. As he worked, her hand remained completely still, trusting him with every small movement. That trust felt heavier than any fabric. The knot loosened easily. Mira exhaled softly, and Ethan felt a strange pride swell in his chest. He had done something right, something meaningful. The 16th knot was more challenging. Ethan had to adjust the fabric gently, lifting part of the robe away from another layer. His hands brushed the edges unintentionally, and each accidental touch made the moment feel warmer, deeper. He worked slowly, carefully, and Mira watched with admiration in her eyes. "You're gentle," she said again. "I try to be," he said quietly. "You don't have to try," she replied. He didn't know how to respond. Compliments were rare in his life. They always felt too big, too bright, almost frightening. But from her, they felt like soft blankets, comforting, warm, honest. He opened the 16th knot. The robe loosened enough that one entire section shifted gracefully to the side. People whispered around them, impressed by how far he had come. But for Ethan, it wasn't about impressing anyone. It was about the moment, about her, about the strange connection forming like a soft thread between their hearts. The 17th knot rested near her back. Mira had to turn slightly for him to reach it, and Ethan carefully moved behind her, feeling more nervous than ever. Standing behind her felt different, not intimidating, but intimate in a quiet, respectful way. He could see the intricate stitching up close, the effort and love that went into every thread. "You're being very careful," she said over her shoulder. "I don't want to hurt the robe," he said. "You won't," she replied. "You haven't hurt anything." The knot was stubborn. Ethan worked at it for several minutes, adjusting the fabric delicately. Mira stood unmoving, letting him take all the time he needed. When the knot finally opened, she turned back to face him with a softened expression. "You see?" she said with a gentle smile. "You're patient enough for this." And He nodded shyly. I guess. No guessing, she said lightly. You are. The 18th knot was near her shoulder. As he reached up to loosen it, he felt her watching him again. This time, he met her eyes, intentionally. There was kindness there, understanding, and something else. Something he couldn't name, but felt deeply. Mira, he whispered, unsure why he said her name but needing to say it. Yes? She said softly. Thank you for trusting me with this. She blinked slowly, touched by his words. And thank you for accepting. He loosened the 18th knot. The 19th and 20th knots came next, both resting near the chest area of the robe. Ethan worked with extreme care, focusing harder than he had all night. The barn was quieter now. People weren't laughing or joking anymore. They were watching with respect, almost reverence. A few elders whispered about old sayings, about how a person who removes the robe carefully is someone with a steady heart. Ethan didn't hear them. His world had narrowed to Mira and the knots between them. The 19th knot loosened. Then, the 20th. With each one, the robe seemed to breathe easier, falling softly in gentle folds. Mira exhaled slowly. Almost there, she said. Ethan nodded, though he suddenly felt a strange sadness, knowing the tradition was nearly over. Not because the robe was ending, but because he didn't want the moment to end. He moved to the 21st knot, one hidden near her waist. It was tight, requiring slow and gentle work. Mira placed her hands together calmly, standing still while he worked through the stubborn twists. As he loosened it, she spoke quietly. Ethan, may I ask something? Asen, may I ask something? He looked up nervously. Of course. Did you feel nervous only because of the knots? She asked. His breath caught. He looked down. No. What made you nervous? She asked gently. You, he whispered. Mira blinked, startled but touched. Me? Yes, he said, still working. You're different, strong, kind, and you see me in a way no one else does. She swallowed softly. He opened the 21st knot. The 22nd knot came free next, then the 23rd. The robe was loose enough now that Mira had to hold one part of it, so it wouldn't slide too suddenly. Finally, he reached the last knot. The 24th knot. The final piece of the tradition. Everyone fell silent. Ethan reached for it with slow hands. His fingers trembled slightly, but not out of fear. Out of something deeper. A feeling he didn't know how to name. Mira watched him with soft, steady eyes. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She looked at him, as if the world had paused for them alone. You can do it, she whispered. He nodded, his fingers working gently, slowly loosening the final knot. With one soft pull, it opened. The robe loosened completely, falling into a soft, graceful shape around her. She caught the fabric before it slipped too far, preserving modesty and tradition. The moment wasn't about revealing anything. It was about the journey they had shared. Soft applause filled the barn, but Ethan barely heard it. Mira stepped closer, very close. Ethan, she said quietly. Thank you for treating me with respect, with care, with heart. He swallowed. Thank you for trusting me. She looked into his eyes deeply. Would you walk with me? Outside, away from the noise. Ethan nodded slowly. They left the barn quietly, walking into the cool mountain night, the stars bright above them. The wind was gentle, brushing against the grass, carrying the soft scent of pine. Mira stopped beneath an old tree, looking up at the sky. You know, she said softly, I didn't want anyone to see me as strange or intimidating. I just wanted someone to see me as human. Ethan stepped closer. I see you. She turned to him, her eyes warm. And I see you. They stood there. Two people who had found something unexpected and gentle between them. A connection born from patience, from respect, from the careful untying of 24 knots. Something real had begun that night, not loudly, not quickly, but slowly and softly. Exactly the way both their hearts needed.